Rob, it's great to be here. It's great to be with a guest today. Good day.
I'm glad you're happy. And now you've got a chocolate chip cookie.
I got a chocolate chip cookie.
It's a good-sized chocolate chip cookie, too. Look at the chocolate chunks in there.
You know what's unusual about this one?
No, sir.
There's something unusual. When Ian brought it in, they put it all down on your end of the table.
Yes, sir.
I rarely get one, but you did share this one with me. This cookie. You got, of course, you kept the whole basket of all the others, but you did give me one cookie.
So my reputation is that
you're a hoarder of cookies.
When the food comes in, I take it all and eat it all for myself.
You do.
And anybody who's met me in person can clearly see that I have an overeating problem with sweets.
Show the size of that basket, Rob, to everybody, and subtract one cookie out of that basket.
Now, Ian Masters is our guest as in Delegate, attorney at law. Ian Masters and his, I understand your wife made these, Ian?
Yes, Kate did. Yep.
Kate, thank you, Kate. They smell delicious.
Thank you, Kate.
She in fact milled that flour. So
yeah.
Nice.
She's serious from scratch.
Yeah. And next time, Kate, have Ian carried on the other end of the table, and I can share more.
You want your own basket, huh? You're like Yogi Berra over there. You're picking a basket? Hey, boo-boo. Ian in the 91st and completing his very first session as a member of the House of Delegates. A creative way to get there, Ian, but nevertheless, I understood that some folks were calling you the Rookie of the Year in terms of how you blended in there.
I certainly would appreciate that. I basically had two real goals going in, and one was to try to have some stability and some effectiveness in the midst of all the chaos that had happened with House 91. And the other thing was to try to not miss a single vote, which I did not. So I had a perfect kind of voting record, made sure everything that came up, there's times people are going back in between out of the House floor. There's times people take a walk on purpose on a controversial bill. But every single vote that came up, wanted to accomplish that because, as you note, I was appointed. No one didn't run a campaign. Nobody voted for me. So I wanted to give the people the ability to check where I was in the issues.
And what did you think after the session ended, and you obviously have another year ahead of you? Are you thinking you might like to run for re-election at that time?
Well, that had originally been the plan, was to do it a little later out. And then the events kind of occurred here. Because it's a little tricky. I've got 4 kids. One of them, I was terrified that during the weeks I was gone, he was going to start crawling. He's 7-8 months old. So the intention was a few years down the road to do that anyway. So we've went ahead of schedule with some of the wild events that had occurred to get me down there. But I tend to believe so. More likely than not, I would say.
Did you miss the crawling?
No.
Good for you.
Yeah, we were able to not miss that, but I was worried about it.
Yeah. Ian, you're a lawyer. What committees are you on, and how does your lawyer experience, skills help you out? So
at present, back to the late appointment and kind of the leftovers essentially that were there. At present, I was just on the Health and Human Resources and public health, that kind of thing. Normally, more of my background is maybe more lined up with judiciary, those type of things, much more familiar with that committee from prior work. But as it pertained to at least abuse and neglect side of things that I do, that aspect of being a lawyer did help with Health and Human Resources. We had some bills that came through there pertaining to that type of thing, or we had a couple bills about the mental health process, things I've done before, or mental hygiene law rather. So it gave me some help there, but which was good because I don't have a big health background or anything like that.
Abuse and neglect. Help us out. What bills actually were passed this year, or at least proposed, that would address abuse and neglect? The one I'm most familiar with was SB 727. I think that's a number that really did not get out of to go very far. What did the session do for abuse and neglect?
So a couple-fold, and I'm not going to be able to cite you numbers. I've got too many of them swimming in my head after the session. But there's a couple aspects that had occurred. First and foremost, one that comes to mind is that we have a dire shortage of folks doing this work, the attorneys as well, attorneys and guardian ad litems. So we did finally pass a bill to increase the pay slightly on that to try to get more folks involved into doing that. We had a couple bills. There was a task force or a group of folks that were working on things prior to me getting there, and I hope to maybe lend a hand as that moves forward. But these certain delegates had a background as being foster providers. So we had a couple bills addressed that we had circumstances where we are kicking kids around foster care, removing them, and sometimes they stay at one place and then the departments of some of these counties decide to move them somewhere else or try to facilitate, different homes. So we basically had a piece of legislation that a little bit more stabilized, that once the child's there for a certain stretch of time, that we're going to presume that that's kind of a good placement for them and not maybe move this child around just because of maybe it's a little logistically easier to arrange visitation or those type of things.
Yeah, we do have a significant problem of abuse and neglect. And we have that as real time. Also, there's speculation from the federal government. Some of these dollars that go to Medicaid, for example, may be cut. If that does happen, again, that's speculation. We don't know what the federal government will do. The problem that we have is going to be just intensified. It's going to be magnified considerably. Have you or has the session given any thought of taking the next step forward? I'm not talking about a baby step. I'm talking about a significant, major step forward to get our hands around abuse and neglect and the child care as a whole.
So there is, as I mentioned, this kind of task force of folks working on that. What I think this session showed is that those folks may or may not have been sort of contemplating trying to find an absolute magic bullet, but it ended up being just a few different minor bills to nibble at the problem.
Yeah.
As to the magic bullet, I'm not sure I have it either, but it is a system that really needs to be overhauled. And our system, we do it a lot different. We have a lot more removals. We have a lot less success of reunifying parents. And I'm not suggesting that you sort of just completely triage the things, but I know that there are very dire cases that we absolutely need to, and then there's some that I wonder if ever should have really gotten to court. And when we have this limited pool of folks actually handling this, I think we may need to really start at sort of first principles from scratch and come up with a way to make this system operate better.
Is there another state you're familiar with that you'd like to model a rebuild after?
That is going to be part of the search there, is kind of, I know sort of just the numbers as I mentioned there, but the actual nuts and bolts of how those states work, I really would like to take a peek. I'm familiar, used to practice in Ohio when I was on the other Panhandle. I'm a little familiar with their system, but not enough to really answer the question thoroughly.
We tend to shy away from a major overhaul. It's easier to tinker at the edges and make repairs. But there have been successes of a major overhaul. Mississippi, for example, with the education system, they did a major overhaul, and they went from very poor ranking to very high in the national ranking. I'm a believer that on occasion you need to take a hard look and understand the problem in total, and then once you understand the problem in total, you can start addressing the best fixes.
I would entirely agree. And I think another reason that I really would like to look at some sort of an overhaul is that the folks in the trenches on this stuff are really, really working hard. Just the other day at Berkeley County, we had sort of a stakeholders or a sort of shareholders meeting as to the folks that do abuse and neglect work that Judge McLaughlin had set up. And these folks are really, really doing everything they can, and they're really putting the shoulder to the stone to address the problem. So it's not as if we don't have the talent in the people. We could certainly use some more of those, but it really is that there's maybe some systemic issues to hopefully maybe examine and fix there.
Is part of the issue money, Ian?
To some extent, particularly at least in the attorney's end, when you're trying to get folks to do this type of work on a court appointment. Likewise with our caseworkers, right? So I've, again, only resided in the 2 panhandles of the state, and when you're in a panhandle, you've got competition, you've got other states, you've got people that can make a short drive to a lot more money. So that's certainly an issue. I know with our caseworkers, we have a tremendous kind of basically a revolving door if they come in and they come out. So that's part of it. I think there'd be a little bit more stability there if we could do that. Probably not the exact session to try to address that. It's been a pretty fiscally conservative circumstance at present, but that's certainly a part of it.
I understand in regards to attorneys doing this work that I guess for a while, one of the judges mandated that pretty much every attorney practicing was going to have to start taking cases because there weren't enough that were volunteering to take cases.
That's correct. Yeah.
What is the status of that now?
I know we certainly have some new faces here in the Panhandle. I've heard from other delegates and other folks that other judges are doing that as well. I think you have to do that. I think it's a type of law. It is certainly emotionally trying, and it's got its own issues to it, but it is not the most complex aspect of law by any means. So any of these lawyers essentially could get into these cases. There's sort of different layers to them where we could give folks sort of entry-level ones to work with. And I will say, especially out here in the Eastern Panhandle, our bar is absolutely incredible and welcoming and helpful. So the new folks that get into that, or if people are listening and want to get into that, it's something we would kind of welcome you with open arms and help you out to work in.
Was that a problem all the way around the state, or
Yes.
specific to this area?
No, that was a problem throughout the state. There were several circuit judges, I think, that made similar decisions to sort of just start rounding folks up and handing those things out.
But it takes folks out of their comfort zone.
Yes.
I know a couple of lawyers that have been now appointed court-appointed attorneys, and they're very nervous about it, very, very nervous. Even though they're extremely skilled lawyers, it is an area they're not familiar with, and I'm going to be curious to see how they adjust and how quickly they adjust. But right now, they're very nervous.
And I understand that. If I was thrown into the realms of law, I don't practice every day. It's certainly nerve-wracking, but it is not a hyper-complex system of law, and largely the newer folks I've seen that have come from disparate different areas of law have done pretty well.
But picking up on that end, lawyers, like everybody else, you're skilled in one area, you're trained in one area, and you've moved to something else. That requires some study, some preparation. How much time is involved is going to detract from their normal business, their normal law? Because it's going to take some. It's going to detract some.
Yeah, absolutely. And this gets back again to trying to raise some of the rates we're paying for appointed attorneys to not make as much of an impact if they're smacking into somebody's private practice. It's certainly going to take some. I don't know exactly how to answer that. I mean, it does take a learning curve, and there's some sort of a fee of entry of just trying to take the time to learn the process. But it's really not the most complex aspect of law I've bumped into. And a lot of these folks, like I said, have really picked up and done pretty well.
Now, was this, you've used the word "we" on several occasions as far as the implementation or instituting this. Was this something that was driven by the legislators, or have the judges independently decided they wish to expand the gene pool?
So the judges are the ones who have, they're essentially in charge of these appointments and who's getting these cases. So they have essentially made it clear in many different judicial circuits that, hey, we've got a shortage and we're going to go do that. So the legislature didn't really have a part of that and certainly didn't rebuke that thought or prevent that from occurring. So it's one of the things going on in that realm.
So the judges have had this authority for quite a while. They've just now more recently started implementing it.
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
Ian Masters, our guest here on the program. He is an attorney at law, so the 91st Delegate District Republican delegate there, and he was appointed after the interesting results of the election that took place. Ian, I want to stay on the courts here for a moment, and maybe you could help all of us understand the relationship between the attorney that's appointed by the judge in some cases, the guardian ad litem, and the CASA. In regards of how they all work with the child involved in this case in the court.
Sure. So your guardian ad litem is an attorney, but they are the attorney that actually is representing the child there. So they're representing the best interests of that child. That child is essentially their client moving forward. The GAL is kind of in this middle role. They're not working for the department or CPS or anybody else, and they're not working essentially for the parent. They're working for the best interests of that child, and they're free to kind of disagree or agree with whichever party on the field they wish to. The other attorneys representing the respondent parents, your job there is to try to navigate them, and hopefully when the process is working, kind of essentially the process involves maybe making an admission or an understanding that there is a parental issue that's going on, then working an improvement plan to fix that issue, and then trying to reunify and get everybody patched up. CASA they end up court appointed, and they sort of help as well with the interests of the child. They sort of can do reports. They help facilitate some services sometimes, but they've been an incredibly useful asset. And I was interested to know that some courts actually aren't using CASA. So one of the bills this year was actually to clarify and try to get that to be a full statewide issue, which will be helpful. We've had very good luck with them here.
Yeah, my numbers may be totally off base here, but I've heard somewhere, 6,000 children are in the pipeline. CASA has maybe 200 of these. And the other institutions you have, the children are being represented one way or the other. But 200 out of 6,000. That leaves a huge vacuum that's not getting the advocacy for the child that they really need.
It's absolutely true. Like I said, here, the 2 or 3 counties I do this work in, COS has been instrumental and helpful. It again was a little shocking to me that wasn't the case in every aspect of the state. So I'm hoping with, and once more, I'm going to forget a bill number for you because there's too many numbers floating around my head, but there was a bill to essentially make sure that the courts could avail themselves to trying to get a COSA program in each of these circuits.
Yeah.
Ian, in the early days of taking over in the 91st, as that came about, how was your acceptance from your constituents?
So, again, when I came back to wanting to making sure I was putting a voting record out there and going forward, there were some folks who certainly know me, other folks are, who's this fella? Throughout one thing I can certainly tell about the 91st is that I got a lot of phone calls when I was in session. There were certain delegates I talked to that didn't have any messages, and I had plenty of folks reaching out to me. So
active district.
Did what I could. Well, I've got a great radio station keeping them informed.
Thank you, sir.
I did what I could to return all those calls, and they vary from an issue here with that or a pothole here, and trying to just help folks. But generally receptive. There's times clearly some of the votes I took that maybe they did disagree with, but and that's the nature of the beast there. But generally pretty receptive. I think. I've certainly had a couple people reach out that at least the first goal I talked about, just trying to provide some effective stability in the middle of all that chaos, that seemed to be the sense that they got, and I hope that is the sense.
Was there a delegate that took you under his or her wing and helped you along?
There are probably several, which is helpful.
How was that Mike Hornby guy?
Not bad at all. But Mike's always keen to always remind me to sort of try to have fun doing it. There's times it's stressful and maybe even somber on some occasions, but he's pretty good about being even keeling and making things fun. But no, I was very familiar with the process, and even a lot of the delegates in the House and folks with the Senate from back to WVCDL days are working on firearms legislation. So I knew a lot of folks well, and we was
Haidt the crankiest of the delegates you had to deal with? The Badger?
The Badger.
Yeah, he can get a little cranky. So he and I kind of got cranky with him as well. We were on the health committee, and there were days in the early parts of the session where our committee's out there till 8, 9 p.m. with these public hearings and testimony on certificate of need and these other issues, and we were putting in an awful lot of work, and he was the vice chair of that committee, and deservedly cranky for what we went through.
Ian, you mentioned that you have a very active, very engaged constituents. The ones that contact you, were they, and it's all hard to kind of pigeonhole, but were there more cultural issues, more infrastructural issues, more economic issues?
It's kind of a mix of both. You get sort of a bill that may make headlines, and of course you're going to get calls on it. So there's And the other fun thing about being a legislator is, of course, the calls are basically split between these hot-button issues. There's no real mandate of, hey, here's what we want you to do. So when certificate of need was going on, we would get, I would get a fair amount of calls, and we would hear folks out. And then other times it would be small stuff about, hey, here's an email with a picture of how busted up my road is that we're on, and you're hooking them up with the process of getting that repaired. But no, it kind of just varies of what people are dealing with and what they're interested in. But
you mentioned certificate of need. Of course, it died very early, and I cannot remember if it was a committee or the floor, but it died early. What was the sense of your constituents? Were they supportive certificate of need?
Generally supporting the repeal, or what the effort of that bill was, which was the repeal of that. And that makes sense, again, growing up in both of these panhandles, living in this panhandle. That's a thing where we essentially, if there weren't those restrictions, would probably have some more health services built in the Panhandle. We're lucky enough to, I have 2 children born in Winchester down the road. We're lucky enough to have other hospitals across the state, but that's an issue that varies geographically. Essentially, is that a lot of the Panhandle areas are kind of in favor of clearing that. But folks in the southern part of the state are worried that if we sort of have a private business run in and quote unquote poach the payers and then sort of just leave the rest of us hanging here, So it's a very tricky state to legislate for because it's very diverse, very different interests throughout the state, and that was kind of what was going on there.
Okay, I'm going to give you a chance to backtrack. You said the badger was a cranky old man. Now the
That's not exactly what he said.
Well, yeah, close to it. That's the way I. But now the badgers reached out to you and said Ian did a great job in his first session. Now, do you want to back off on being a cranky old man?
I think he admires the moniker. So
I think he craves the moniker.
There are worse things to be called, but no, Mike was helpful, and I appreciate the comment.
Okay.
Let me tell you, my first meeting with Mike Height, when he and Mr. Hornby took over the place in late 15, Badger comes in. Rick Wachtel had prepared me. He said, now Mike Hornby's just a genuinely nice guy. You're going to really enjoy him. Mike Height's a little edgier. But once you get used to him, he's a good guy. so the first thing Height does, he said, "What's this deal with all you people having your pictures up on the website? Ain't none of you good looking enough to have your pictures up on that website." That was one of my first meetings with Mike.
And it hasn't changed.
Yeah,
he's got his own way of making friends, but it works.
I think I spit my food out. We were having lunch. I think I spit my food out when he pulled that line out there. Ian, what's the key for a first-term delegate navigating his way around a 60-day session?
So I think what I was lucky with is I would hope that folks would have a more familiar circumstance with the process itself, right? And I'm not picking on anybody here, but when we had a couple of first-year trainings, there were some folks that were elected that hadn't ever been to the Capitol before, right? And that happens, and you don't need to be the Capitol to learn this thing. You can watch the process, listen to committees, understand how it really works. My background with doing that with WVCDO, with different pieces of legislation over the years, was really, really helpful to put me just hit the ground running to understand that. So I think really it would be understanding the process there. And the process would bring me to my next point. It kind of can teach you the realities of things. Legislation is an area where you're not going to get every single thing you want all the time. You're often going to be frustrated, and in some regards the process is designed to be frustrating. It's designed to slow things down and kind of have them really be deliberative. So I guess those are some of the things I would advise, is to really understand the process.
Is it difficult, I know you're a person of principle, is it difficult for a person of principle to vote for legislation that has 75% of the things I want in it and 25% of the things I don't want in it?
I've seen folks have a lot harder time with that than I. But I, in doing this for years, have kind of understood that you don't get everything you want all at once, and that sometimes it's a multi-year process to do that. I try to not let the notion of just sort of all or nothing is not really one that avails itself to politics or legislation very well. So I've always kind of seen it as the art of the possible and what can be done at this point in time. And is it a net positive or net negative? Is it something that's at least going to improve things, but maybe not the full way you want, versus is it something that's going to make things worse? So I know for some folks, including a couple in the broader delegation from the Eastern Panhandle, that are very, very hard about if there's even a tiny modicum of something that's a little bit wrong, that they will kill all of that. But I think that the nature of the beast is that you've got to really examine the full package, and if it's a net negative, then try to stomach that.
Final minute, how much, I know you're just kind of starting this, but have you given thought as to how long you'd like to do this?
That's a good question, and we'll see. And the beautiful baker of these cookies here will probably have some input as to that. And I'd be remiss without expressing how much a lot of our significant others do to hold down the fort. And for her, watching the 4 kids when I was gone,
sure,
she was tremendous.
Well, Ian, as long as your wife is baking cookies for us, is as long as you're going to have to be the delegate from the area. Just really, Bill and I have a simple rule about that. Hey, thanks so much. Appreciate you coming in.
Not a problem. It's good to see you, folks.
All the best to you.
Thank you.
Now, Ian Masters from the 91st.